In the mountains of Afghanistan, where silence could mean survival and one wrong decision could cost lives, a single radio call changed everything. The voice on the other end wasn't speaking in code or military jargon. It was raw, desperate, and carrying information that would make hardened Navy SEALs question everything they thought they knew about their mission. The man they called Falcon had been their target for months. Intelligence reports painted him as a high-value enemy combatant, a dangerous insurgent leader who had American blood on his hands. The SEALs had trained for this moment, planned every detail, and were now just minutes away from what should have been a routine capture or elimination operation. But sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one you're hunting. Sometimes it's the lie you've been told about who you're supposed to hunt. What happened in those final moments before the SEALs reached their target would expose a web of deception that reached far beyond the Afghan mountains. It would challenge everything these warriors believed about duty, honor, and the cost of blind obedience. Most importantly, it would prove that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't pulling the trigger, it's having the strength to lower your weapon when everything inside you screams to fire. This is the story of how one man's desperate plea for truth saved lives on both sides of a conflict, and how the warriors trained to never question orders had to make the hardest decision of their military careers. It's about the moment when following protocol could have led to the greatest regret of their lives, and how choosing conscience over command changed everything. The desert wind carried dust and the distant sound of helicopters as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison checked his gear one final time. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around the SEAL team like a familiar blanket, offering concealment but no comfort. In 6 hours, they would either be celebrating another successful mission or dealing with the aftermath of something gone terribly wrong. Morrison's team had been in Afghanistan for 8 months, long enough to know that nothing was ever as simple as the briefing made it sound. But this mission felt different. The intelligence was too clean, too precise, and the target too perfect. After years of chasing shadows through mountain caves and urban compounds, they were finally going after someone who mattered. The man they called Falcon had been on their radar for 3 months. According to Central Intelligence, he was a mid-level Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on American supply convoys. The file painted him as a master strategist who had American blood on his hands and knew enough about insurgent operations to fill a database. More importantly, he was supposedly planning something big, something that could cost dozens of American lives if they didn't stop him. Petty Officer First Class Miguel Santos adjusted the scope on his rifle and glanced at Morrison. They had worked together for 2 years, long enough to communicate with nothing more than a look. Santos raised an eyebrow, the question clear, "Are you sure about this one?" Morrison nodded, though something in his gut twisted. The intelligence had come through unusual channels. Instead of their regular CIA contacts, this mission had been handed down from someone higher up the chain, someone with enough clearance to bypass normal procedures. The photographs of Falcon were grainy, taken from a distance, and the supposed evidence of his crimes was circumstantial at best. But orders were orders, and Morrison had learned long ago that questioning intelligence in the middle of an operation was a luxury that could get people killed. The rest of the team gathered in the pre-mission huddle. Petty Officer Second Class David Chen, their communications specialist, ran through the radio frequencies one more time. Petty Officer First Class Tony Rodriguez checked the medical supplies, knowing that in Afghanistan, you prepared for the worst and hoped for anything better. Petty Officer Second Class Alex Thompson, their explosives expert, verified the breach charges that would get them into Falcon's suspected hideout. Chief Petty Officer Sam Williams, Morrison's second-in-command, pulled out the satellite images for one final review. The target location was a small compound in the mountains, isolated enough to provide security but accessible enough for their extraction. Intelligence suggested Falcon would be there with minimal security, possibly planning his next attack. "Remember, we want him alive if possible," Morrison told his team. "But if he poses a threat to any of you, don't hesitate. The mission comes second to bringing everyone home." It was the same speech he gave before every operation, but tonight it felt heavier. Morrison had been doing this long enough to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. But he also knew that instincts without evidence were just paranoia, and paranoia could be as dangerous as carelessness. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was routine. The crew chief gave them the 5-minute warning, and Morrison's team ran through their final equipment checks. Weapons loaded, communications tested, mission parameters reviewed. They had done this hundreds of times, but tonight felt like the first time all over again. As they fast-roped into the darkness, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The intelligence was too convenient, the target too isolated, and the timing too perfect. In his experience, real military targets were messy, complicated, and never as clean as the briefings suggested. But they were committed now. The helicopters disappeared into the night, leaving the 6-man team alone in hostile territory with a mission to complete and a target to find. The compound was exactly where intelligence said it would be. As they approached through the darkness, using night vision to navigate the rocky terrain, everything matched the satellite photographs. The building layout, the approach routes, even the security patterns were exactly as briefed. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Morrison more nervous. They set up overwatch positions and began their surveillance. Through their scopes, they could see movement inside the compound. Thermal imaging showed at least 4 people, possibly 5. One figure matched the general description of Falcon, though at this distance and in these conditions, positive identification was impossible. Chen monitored the radio frequencies, listening for any enemy communications that might indicate they had been detected. Rodriguez kept watch on their extraction route, making sure they had a clear path out if things went wrong. Thompson studied the building structure, looking for the best entry point that would minimize risk to both the team and any potential hostages. Santos focused his scope on the target building, trying to get a clearer view of the occupants. Something bothered him about their movement patterns. They weren't acting like insurgents planning an attack or criminals trying to stay hidden. They were moving like ordinary people going about their daily routines. "Boss," Santos whispered into his microphone, "I'm not seeing anything that looks like tactical behavior. No weapons visible, no security protocols, no lookouts. They're acting like civilians." Morrison frowned. Intelligence had been clear that this was a military target, a command center for insurgent operations. But Santos was one of the best observers he had ever worked with, and if Santos said something looked wrong, it probably was. "Keep watching," Morrison replied. "We'll give it another hour before we move in. Maybe they're just being careful." But, as the minutes passed, Morrison's doubts grew stronger. The people in the compound weren't acting like military personnel. They were acting like a family. Through the thermal imaging, he could see what looked like an adult helping a smaller figure, possibly a child. Another figure appeared to be cooking or preparing food. This didn't match the intelligence profile at all. Williams crawled over to Morrison's position, his expression troubled. "Something's not right about this," he whispered. "I've been watching their patterns, and this doesn't look like a command center. It looks like someone's home." Morrison had been thinking the same thing. In his years of operations, he had learned to distinguish between military targets and civilian locations. Military personnel, even when trying to blend in, moved with a certain awareness, a constant readiness for trouble. These people were relaxed, comfortable, moving like they were safe in their own space. "Chen, any chatter on the frequencies?" Morrison asked. "Negative, boss. Nothing but routine civilian traffic from the valley. No military communications, no coded messages, nothing that suggests insurgent activity." The pieces weren't adding up. Intelligence had painted this as a high-value target, a command center for terrorist operations. But everything Morrison's team was observing suggested they were looking at an ordinary Afghan family going about their evening routine. Thompson had positioned himself to observe the compound's exterior, looking for signs of defensive preparations or hidden weapons caches. After an hour of careful observation, he reported back with more troubling news. No defensive positions, no hidden weapon emplacements, no escape routes or alternate exits. If this is a military target, they have the worst operational security I've ever seen. Morrison felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Either they were dealing with insurgents so incompetent they posed no real threat, or they were dealing with something else entirely. Neither option matched the intelligence briefing that had described Falcon as a sophisticated and dangerous enemy. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission from their command center. Morrison listened as the voice on the other end confirmed that satellite surveillance showed the target in position and cleared them for immediate action. Falcon is confirmed on site. You are cleared hot for mission execution. Repeat, you are cleared hot. Morrison stared at the compound through his night vision scope. Everything his training told him said they should move in immediately. They had their orders, they had confirmed the target location, and they had authorization to proceed. But everything his experience told him said something was terribly wrong with this picture. Santos, Chen, Rodriguez, Thompson, Williams, Morrison called softly into his microphone. Team Leaders Conference. Now. His 5 team members crawled to his position, moving with the silent precision that came from years of working together. In the darkness, Morrison could see the questions in their eyes. I want honest assessments, Morrison said quietly. What are you seeing? Civilians, Santos said immediately. I see a family, possibly with children. No weapons, no military behavior, no indication this is anything other than a normal household. Same here, Williams added. If this is a terrorist command center, it's the most relaxed one I've ever seen. Chen nodded. No military communications, no coded traffic, nothing that suggests insurgent activity. Just normal civilian radio chatter. Rodriguez and Thompson agreed. Everything they were observing contradicted the intelligence briefing. Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for years to come, regardless of how it turned out. We're going to get a closer look before we go in. Something doesn't add up, and I want to be sure we have the right target before we breach. It was a violation of standard operating procedure. Once they were cleared for action, they were supposed to execute immediately. Delays created opportunities for compromise, and compromise could be fatal. But Morrison had learned that sometimes following procedure blindly could be even more dangerous than breaking it. The team moved closer to the compound, using cover and concealment to get within 50 meters of the target building. At this range, even with limited visibility, they could see more details. What they saw made Morrison's blood run cold. Through a window, clearly visible in the thermal scope, was a woman holding what was obviously a young child. An older man sat nearby, reading something by lamplight. 2 teenagers moved around the room, helping with what appeared to be household chores. This wasn't a terrorist command center. This was a family home. Morrison's mind raced through the possibilities. Either intelligence had given them the wrong location, or Falcon was using his family as cover for his operations, or the intelligence was completely wrong about who Falcon was. The radio crackled again. Bravo team, what's your status? Satellite shows you in position. Why haven't you executed? Morrison keyed his microphone, knowing that his next words could determine whether innocent people lived or died. Command, we need to verify target identification. What we're observing doesn't match the intelligence profile. There was a long pause before the response came. Bravo team, you have positive identification on target location and authorization to proceed. Execute immediately. Command, we're observing what appears to be a civilian family with children. Request additional confirmation of target identity before proceeding. The pause this time was even longer. When the voice came back, it carried an edge that Morrison had never heard before. Bravo team, you have your orders. Intelligence confirms Falcon is on site. The target is confirmed hostile. Execute now. Morrison looked at his team. In the darkness, he could see the same questions in their eyes that were racing through his mind. They were trained to follow orders without question, to trust that intelligence knew what they were doing, and to execute their missions regardless of personal doubts. But they were also trained to protect innocent life, to verify targets before engaging, and to use their judgment when situations didn't match expectations. Santos crawled closer to Morrison. Boss, that's a family in there. I can see kids. Morrison nodded. He had seen them too. The question was what to do about it.
everything in his training said to follow orders.
Intelligence had confirmed the target, command had given authorization, and doubt could be a luxury that cost lives. But everything in his conscience said that breaking down that door could destroy innocent lives based on information that didn't match what they were seeing.
Chen, try to raise someone higher up the chain. I want to talk to someone who can give us more information about this target.
Chen worked his radio, trying to reach their mission commander or intelligence officer.
After several minutes of trying different frequencies, he shook his head. No response, boss. Everyone's either off the air or not answering.
The radio crackled with another transmission.
Bravo team, you are ordered to execute immediately. Any further delay will be considered a failure to follow direct orders.
Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He had 6 men under his command, all of whom were looking to him for leadership. He had orders from his superiors, who presumably had information he didn't have. And he had what appeared to be an innocent family 50 meters away, unaware that armed men were debating their fate in the darkness. The decision he made in the next few minutes would define not only his career but his ability to live with himself for the rest of his life.
Morrison looked through his scope one more time. The family was still there, still acting like ordinary people in their own home.
The woman was now putting the child to bed. The man had set aside his reading and was preparing to sleep.
The teenagers were finishing their evening tasks.
Team conference, Morrison whispered.
I need to know where everyone stands.
In the darkness, his 5 team members gathered around him. Each of them had been watching the same scene, drawing the same conclusions, facing the same terrible choice between following orders and following conscience.
I think we're about to make a mistake, Santos said quietly. A big one. Williams nodded. This doesn't feel right. Something's wrong with the intelligence.
Chen, Rodriguez, and Thompson all agreed. Whatever they were looking at, it wasn't what they had been told to expect. Morrison realized that in a few minutes, he would either have to break down that door and potentially destroy an innocent family, or disobey direct orders from his command. Neither choice felt right, but one felt like something he could live with. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was different. Calmer, more professional, but carrying an urgency that made Morrison's stomach drop. Any station, this is Falcon.
I repeat, this is Falcon. I have urgent information for American forces in my area. Please respond.
Morrison's team looked at each other in shock. If someone was using the call sign Falcon to contact American forces, then either they had been trying to kill someone who was actually trying to help them, or the situation was even more complicated than they had imagined. Morrison's hand froze on his weapon as the radio transmission echoed in his earpiece. The voice calling himself Falcon spoke English with an accent, but the words were clear and desperate. Chen immediately began trying to locate the source of the transmission while Morrison tried to process what they had just heard.
Any American forces in the coast region, this is Falcon. I have critical intelligence about an attack plan for tomorrow. Multiple American lives are at risk. Please respond if you can hear this transmission. Santos looked at Morrison with wide eyes. Boss, if that's really Falcon, and he's trying to help us.
Morrison held up a hand for silence, his mind racing through the implications. Either someone was impersonating Falcon to mislead them, or the man they had been sent to capture or kill was actually trying to save American lives. Neither possibility made sense with the intelligence briefing they had received.
Chen worked frantically with his radio equipment, trying to get a bearing on the transmission.
It's coming from the compound, boss.
Whoever Falcon is, he's in that building.
The radio in Morrison's hand crackled with an incoming transmission from their command center.
Bravo team, what's your status? Execute your mission immediately.
Morrison stared at the radio, then at the compound where he could still see the family moving peacefully through their evening routine. Someone was lying to him, but he didn't know who or why.
His training told him to trust command and execute his orders. His instincts told him that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. Chen, can you respond to that Falcon transmission without giving away our position? Chen nodded and adjusted his radio. This is American military forces. Falcon, identify yourself and state your location.
The response came immediately.
Thank God. This is Ahmad Hassan. I work with your intelligence people. They call me Falcon because I watch the mountains and report what I see. I have been trying to reach someone for hours.
Morrison felt the pieces of a horrible puzzle starting to fall into place. If Ahmad Hassan was an intelligence asset, someone who worked with American forces, then either their mission was based on completely false information, or someone had deliberately sent them to eliminate one of their own sources.
Falcon, this is American forces. What intelligence do you have? There is a group of fighters moving toward FOB Chapman. They have explosives, enough to damage your base.
They plan to attack at dawn when your guard changes.
I have been watching them for 3 days, waiting for a way to contact you. FOB Chapman was their forward operating base, home to over 200 American personnel.
If Hassan was telling the truth, then dozens of lives were at risk while Morrison's team was preparing to assault the one person who could save them. Morrison's radio crackled again with another transmission from command.
Bravo team, you are in direct violation of orders. Execute your mission now or face court-martial.
The threat was clear, but Morrison found himself caring less about his career and more about the growing certainty that they were about to make a catastrophic mistake. Everything Hassan was saying could be verified, but only if they took the time to investigate instead of following orders blindly.
Chen, ask Falcon for specific details about the attack. Numbers, weapons, approach route, anything that can be verified. Chen relayed the request, and Hassan responded with information that made Morrison's blood chill.
The details were specific, credible, and terrifying. According to Hassan, a group of Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in the mountains overlooking FOB Chapman with enough explosive devices to penetrate the base's defenses during the morning guard change. More importantly, Hassan provided details about the attack plan that only someone with extensive knowledge of both Taliban tactics and American security procedures would know.
This wasn't the kind of information that someone could fabricate on the spot. Williams crawled over to Morrison's position. Boss, if this guy is legit, and we take him out, Chapman gets hit at dawn. That's 200 of our people. Morrison nodded grimly.
The mathematics were horrible but simple. Follow orders and potentially sacrifice 200 American lives, or disobey orders and potentially save them.
It wasn't really a choice at all. Chen, ask Falcon why he was designated as a target for elimination.
The response came quickly and with obvious confusion.
I do not understand. I am not a target. I work with your people. Agent Martinez knows me, Agent Thompson knows me.
I provide information about Taliban movements in these mountains.
Morrison felt sick.
If Hassan was telling the truth, then someone had either made a massive intelligence error, or someone had deliberately fed them false information to eliminate an American asset. Either way, innocent people were about to die because of lies. The radio crackled with Hassan's voice again, now tinged with growing panic.
American forces, are you still there? The attack on your base is scheduled for dawn. That is less than 4 hours from now.
You must warn Chapman immediately.
Morrison looked at his team.
6 professional warriors, trained to follow orders without question, now faced with the possibility that following those orders would result in the deaths of their fellow soldiers. The choice should have been obvious, but military discipline was a powerful force.
What's everyone thinking? Morrison asked quietly. Santos spoke first.
If this guy is really one of ours, and we kill him while Chapman gets attacked, I'll never forgive myself.
Rodriguez nodded. The family we've been watching doesn't match any terrorist profile I've ever seen. They're acting like normal people because they probably are normal people.
Thompson had been silent, but now he looked up from his position.
Boss, I've been watching this compound for 2 hours.
There's no security, no weapons, no defensive positions.
If Hassan is a Taliban commander, he's the most trusting one I've ever seen.
Chen had been monitoring radio frequencies throughout their conversation. Boss, I'm picking up Taliban chatter from the direction Hassan mentioned.
They're discussing movement and timing, but it's all coded. Could be confirmation of what he's telling us?
Williams, Morrison's most experienced team member, had been thinking through the tactical situation. If we breach that compound and Hassan is really one of ours, we blow his cover and probably get him killed.
If we don't breach and he's telling the truth about Chapman, we could save 200 lives.
Morrison realized that his team had already made their decision. Despite years of training to follow orders without question, they were choosing conscience over command. The question was whether he had the courage to make the same choice.
Chen, contact Chapman directly.
Warn them about a possible attack at dawn and tell them the intelligence is coming from Falcon.
Chen worked his radio, trying to reach FOB Chapman on their emergency frequency.
After several tense minutes, he made contact and relayed Hassan's warning. The response was immediate and alarming.
Bravo team, Chapman confirms they have no intelligence about any planned attack.
However, they're taking the warning seriously and increasing security. They want to speak directly to your source. Morrison made a decision that would either save lives or end his military career.
Chen, tell Hassan we need to meet with him face to face.
Tell him to come outside with his hands visible and identify himself clearly.
It was a massive violation of operational security.
If Hassan was really a Taliban commander, Morrison was giving him the opportunity to escape or call for help. If Hassan was telling the truth, Morrison was putting an intelligence asset at risk by exposing him to potential surveillance.
But, if Hassan was telling the truth about the attack on Chapman, this conversation could save 200 American lives. Hassan's response came immediately. I will come outside. Please do not shoot.
I have important information about the attack, and I have proof of my work with your intelligence services.
Morrison's team took positions that would allow them to cover Hassan while maintaining their own security. This was the moment of truth.
In the next few minutes, they would either meet an American intelligence asset who could save lives, or walk into a trap set by a Taliban commander. The front door of the compound opened slowly, and a middle-aged Afghan man stepped outside with his hands raised above his head. He moved carefully, obviously aware that armed men were watching him, but without the tactical awareness that Morrison would expect from a military commander.
I am Ahmad Hassan, the man called out in English.
I work with Agent Martinez from your CIA. I have identification and proof of my service. Morrison studied the man through his scope. Hassan looked tired, worried, but not afraid in the way that Morrison would expect from someone who had been caught in a deception.
He looked like a man desperately trying to save lives.
Hassan, move slowly toward the sound of my voice.
Keep your hands visible and do not make any sudden movements.
Hassan moved forward carefully, and, as he came closer, Morrison could see that he was exactly what he appeared to be, a middle-aged Afghan man, worried and exhausted, carrying papers that he hoped would prove his identity. When Hassan was within 10 meters, Morrison called for him to stop.
Hassan, tell me about Agent Martinez. Hassan's response was immediate and detailed.
He described Agent Martinez's appearance, his assignment location, even personal details about the man's family and interests. It was the kind of information that only someone who had worked closely with Martinez would know. Hassan, tell me about the attack on Chapman. Hassan pulled out a notebook and began reading specific details about the planned attack. The number of fighters, their weapons, their planned approach route, even the specific time they intended to strike. The information was too detailed and too specific to be fabricated. Morrison realized that he was looking at exactly what Hassan claimed to be, an Afghan man who risked his life to provide intelligence to American forces, and who was now trying to prevent an attack that could kill hundreds of his allies. The radio crackled with another transmission from command, this time with a tone of barely controlled fury.
Bravo team, you are in direct violation of orders. Return to base immediately for disciplinary action.
Morrison looked at Hassan, then at his team, then at the compound where Hassan's family waited for him to return home safely. The choice was no longer difficult. It was obvious. Hassan, get back inside and keep your family safe. Chen, contact Chapman and give them everything Hassan told us. Williams, Santos, Rodriguez, Thompson were moving to a new position to observe the approach route Hassan described. Morrison had just made a decision that would either vindicate his team's choice to disobey orders or destroy their military careers. But, as he watched Hassan hurry back to his family, Morrison realized that he would rather face a court-martial than live with the knowledge that he had killed an innocent man and allowed an attack on his fellow soldiers. The next few hours would determine whether their choice had been right, but Morrison already knew that it had been necessary. Sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't following orders. Sometimes it was having the wisdom and strength to disobey them. Chen had been working his radio, coordinating with FOB Chapman to relay Hassan's intelligence. The response from Chapman was both encouraging and terrifying.
Boss, Chapman confirms that Hassan's information matches some intelligence they received independently but couldn't verify. They're treating this as a credible threat and implementing full defensive measures.
Morrison felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that Hassan's information was being taken seriously, and dread at the realization that they had come within minutes of eliminating the one person who could save their fellow soldiers.
Santos had been monitoring the radio frequencies for enemy traffic.
Boss, I'm picking up increased Taliban chatter from the direction Hassan mentioned. They're discussing timing and coordination.
Sounds like they're moving into position.
The pieces were falling into place, and they painted a picture that made Morrison sick.
Someone had deliberately provided false intelligence to eliminate Hassan, possibly to ensure that the attack on Chapman would succeed. But who would want American soldiers to die, and why?
Thompson had been studying the terrain between their position and the approach route Hassan had described.
Boss, if we move to the ridgeline Hassan mentioned, we can observe the attack route and provide early warning to Chapman.
Morrison made another command decision.
We're moving.
Hassan saved Chapman, now we're going to make sure his intelligence was accurate and provide what support we can. As Morrison's team moved through the darkness toward the position Hassan had described, Morrison realized that they had crossed a line that they could never uncross. They had chosen conscience over command, truth over orders, and the lives of their fellow soldiers over their own careers. But, as they took positions overlooking the route where Taliban fighters were supposedly moving into position to attack FOB Chapman, Morrison knew that they had made the right choice. In a few hours, when the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, they would either be vindicated or destroyed. Either way, they would be able to live with themselves. Dawn was still 3 hours away when Morrison's team reached the observation point Hassan had described. The rocky outcropping provided perfect visibility over the valley leading to FOB Chapman, and, as Morrison studied the terrain through his night vision scope, he realized that Hassan's intelligence was devastatingly accurate. Below them, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, Morrison could see movement. Taliban fighters were positioning themselves exactly where Hassan had predicted, carrying equipment that looked like the explosive devices he had described.
The attack on Chapman wasn't just possible, it was imminent. Chen immediately radioed their observations to Chapman while Santos counted the enemy fighters taking positions below.
Boss, I count at least 12 fighters, possibly more. They have what looks like rocket-propelled grenades and enough explosive devices to breach Chapman's perimeter. Morrison felt a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with the tactical situation. His team had been right to disobey orders. Hassan had been telling the truth, and Chapman was about to face exactly the attack he had warned them about. If they had followed their original orders and eliminated Hassan, this attack would have succeeded with catastrophic results. But that satisfaction was tempered by a growing anger at whoever had fed them false intelligence. Someone had deliberately tried to eliminate Hassan, knowing that his death would ensure the success of an attack on American forces. That level of betrayal suggested something far more serious than an intelligence error.
Williams had been studying the enemy positions through his scope. Boss, they're setting up for a coordinated assault. Multiple approach vectors, diversionary attacks to draw defenders away from their main target. This isn't a random raid, this is a professional military operation.
The radio crackled with a transmission from Chapman.
Bravo team, we have your intelligence and are implementing defensive measures. Can you provide real-time updates on enemy positions?
Morrison realized that his team was now in a unique position. They could observe the entire attack as it developed and provide Chapman with tactical intelligence that could save lives. But doing so would put them even further outside the chain of command and in direct violation of their original orders. Chen, tell Chapman will provide overwatch and real-time intelligence.
Santos, Rodriguez, take positions to cover the northern approach.
Thompson, Williams, cover the southern route. I'll coordinate with Chapman and keep watch on the main force. As his team moved into position, Morrison couldn't help but think about the series of decisions that had brought them to this point. 12 hours ago, they had been preparing for a routine capture operation. Now they were providing unauthorized support for a base defense against an attack they had learned about by disobeying direct orders.
The irony was bitter but clear. Following orders would have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers. Disobeying orders was going to save them. Santos's voice came through Morrison's earpiece.
Boss, movement on the northern route. Looks like a diversionary force, maybe 4 fighters with light weapons.
They're moving to draw attention away from the main attack.
Morrison relayed the information to Chapman and watched as the main Taliban force continued their preparations in the valley below. Their coordination was impressive and terrifying. These weren't amateur insurgents, they were professional soldiers with detailed knowledge of American defensive procedures. Thompson reported movement on the southern approach, confirming Hassan's prediction that the attack would come from multiple directions.
Boss, 3 fighters moving into position with what looks like mortar equipment. They're planning to provide covering fire for the main assault. Morrison realized that Hassan's intelligence hadn't just been accurate, it had been remarkably detailed.
Hassan had somehow gathered information about a complex, multi-pronged attack and provided it with enough specificity to allow Chapman to prepare an effective defense. The question that nagged at Morrison was how Hassan had acquired such detailed intelligence, and why someone had wanted him eliminated before he could share it. Chen had been monitoring radio traffic from the Taliban forces, and his report made Morrison's blood run cold.
Boss, they're coordinating their attack with someone inside Chapman.
I'm hearing references to guard changes, shift rotations, and defensive positions that they shouldn't know about. Morrison felt the pieces of a much larger puzzle starting to fall into place.
The attack on Chapman wasn't just a Taliban operation, it was being coordinated by someone with inside knowledge of the base's security procedures.
And Hassan hadn't just been providing intelligence about the attack, he had been investigating a network of infiltration and betrayal that reached into the highest levels of American military operations.
Chen, can you get more details about that coordination? Chen worked his radio equipment, trying to isolate and translate the Taliban communications.
After several minutes of careful listening, he provided information that made Morrison realize they had stumbled into something much larger than a simple attack.
Boss, they're getting real-time updates about Chapman's defensive preparations. Someone inside the base is feeding them information about American responses to their movements.
Morrison realized that Hassan hadn't just been warning them about an attack, he had been trying to expose a spy network that was providing Taliban forces with detailed intelligence about American operations. And someone had tried to eliminate Hassan to protect that network. The radio crackled with another transmission from their command center, but this time the voice was different. Calmer, more professional, but carrying an undertone of menace.
Bravo team, return to base immediately for debriefing.
Your mission parameters have changed. Morrison stared at his radio, realizing that the voice belonged to someone he didn't recognize. In all his years of operations, his missions had been coordinated by the same group of intelligence officers and military commanders. This voice was new, and its appearance at this particular moment was deeply suspicious.
Chen, try to get verification on that last transmission.
I want to know who's giving us orders.
Chen worked his radio, trying to contact their usual command structure.
After several minutes of attempting different frequencies and call signs, he reported back with information that confirmed Morrison's growing suspicions.
Boss, I can't reach any of our normal contacts. Everyone who should be coordinating this mission is either off the air or not responding. Whoever just tried to recall us isn't going through normal channels.
Morrison realized that they were caught in the middle of something much more complex and dangerous than a simple military operation. Someone had tried to eliminate Hassan to ensure the success of an attack on Chapman. When that failed, someone was now trying to recall Morrison's team to prevent them from interfering with the attack. The question was whether the betrayal extended into Morrison's own command structure, or whether outside forces had simply compromised their communications. Santos's voice interrupted Morrison's thoughts with urgent intelligence. "Boss, the main force is starting to move. They're advancing toward Chapman's perimeter. ETA to contact is approximately 30 minutes. Morrison made a decision that would either vindicate everything his team had done or get them all killed. Chen, contact Chapman directly and warn them that their communications may be compromised. Tell them to implement alternate defensive procedures and ignore any last-minute changes to their security protocols." It was a massive accusation to make without proof, but Morrison's instincts were screaming that the attack on Chapman was being coordinated by someone with access to American intelligence. Hassan had discovered that coordination, and someone had tried to eliminate him before he could expose it. Chen relayed Morrison's warning to Chapman, and the response was immediate and alarming. "Bravo team, Chapman confirms they received orders 20 minutes ago to reduce perimeter security and change guard rotations. Those orders came through official channels but didn't feel right to the base commander." Morrison felt his blood turn to ice. The attack wasn't just being coordinated with inside intelligence, it was being facilitated by someone with enough authority to issue orders that would weaken Chapman's defenses. "Chen, tell Chapman to ignore those orders and maintain full defensive posture. Someone is trying to help the attack succeed." The radio crackled with Hassan's voice, weak but urgent. "American forces, this is Falcon. The attack is beginning. I can see fighters moving toward your base. But, be warned, they have someone inside helping them." Morrison realized that Hassan was still providing intelligence even as the attack began, risking his own life to save American soldiers. The man they had been ordered to eliminate was continuing to provide information that could determine the outcome of the battle for Chapman. Thompson's voice came through Morrison's earpiece with the tactical update that confirmed the attack was beginning. "Boss, mortar fire incoming on Chapman's position. The diversionary attacks are starting." Morrison could see muzzle flashes in the valley as the Taliban forces began their assault on FOB Chapman. The attack was unfolding exactly as Hassan had predicted, but with the added horror of knowing that someone inside Chapman was working to ensure its success. Santos reported that the Northern Diversionary Force was engaging Chapman's outer defenses, drawing attention and resources away from the main attack route. Rodriguez confirmed that the southern mortar position was providing covering fire for the main assault. Morrison realized that his team was in a unique position to influence the outcome of the battle. They could observe the entire attack as it developed and provide Chapman with real-time intelligence about enemy movements and tactics. More importantly, they could identify any suspicious changes to Chapman's defensive responses that might indicate continued inside assistance to the attackers. "All positions, maintain overwatch and report everything you see. Chen, keep Chapman informed about enemy positions and movements. Williams, watch for any indication that Chapman's responses are being predicted or countered too effectively." As the battle for FOB Chapman began in earnest, Morrison realized that his team had become the critical link in preventing not just a military attack, but the exposure of a betrayal that reached into the highest levels of American military operations. The next few hours would determine whether Hassan's sacrifice had been worth it, whether Morrison's team had made the right choice in disobeying orders, and whether they could prevent the success of an attack that someone inside their own command structure was working to facilitate. But, as Morrison watched tracer rounds light up the darkness over FOB Chapman, he knew that they had already succeeded in the most important mission of all. They had chosen truth over lies, conscience over command, and the lives of their fellow soldiers over their own careers. Whatever happened next, they would face it with clear consciences and the knowledge that they had done everything in their power to prevent a catastrophe that someone else had worked very hard to ensure. The battle for Chapman was just beginning, but the battle for the soul of Morrison's team was already over. They had chosen their side, and they would live or die with the consequences of that choice. The battle for FOB Chapman erupted with a violence that lit up the pre-dawn darkness like deadly fireworks. Morrison watched through his scope as Taliban fighters executed their assault with precision that confirmed everything Hassan had warned them about. This wasn't a desperate raid, it was a carefully orchestrated attack designed to maximize casualties and minimize the defenders' ability to respond effectively. Chen's radio crackled with updates from Chapman's defenders, and each report confirmed Morrison's worst fears.
Boss, Chapman reports that the attackers seem to know exactly where their weak points are. They're hitting defensive positions that aren't marked on any standard intelligence reports. Morrison realized they were watching the near-perfect execution of an inside job.
Someone with detailed knowledge of Chapman's defenses had provided the Taliban with information that was allowing them to strike with devastating accuracy.
Santos reported from his position covering the northern approach. Boss, the diversionary force isn't just creating noise, they're drawing defenders away from positions that the main force is specifically avoiding. Someone told them exactly how Chapman would respond to a multi-directional attack.
The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental. Morrison had seen enough Taliban attacks to know that they were typically chaotic, relying on surprise and overwhelming force rather than tactical precision. What he was observing below was the work of professional military planners with access to detailed intelligence about American defensive procedures. Thompson's voice came through Morrison's earpiece with an update that made the situation even more desperate. Boss, the mortar team is adjusting their fire based on real-time information. They're hitting targets that just moved into position.
Someone is feeding them current intelligence about Chapman's defensive adjustments.
Morrison keyed his radio to contact Chapman directly.
Chapman, this is Bravo team.
You have a serious security breach. The attackers are receiving real-time intelligence about your defensive positions and movements. The response from Chapman was immediate and filled with the sounds of battle.
Bravo team, we're starting to realize that.
We've identified several communications that should have been secure but seem to be compromised.
Can you provide us with intelligence about enemy positions?
Morrison realized that his team had become Chapman's primary source of reliable intelligence. Everyone else who should have been providing support was either compromised or had been deliberately removed from the communication network.
Chapman, we have overwatch on the entire attack.
Main force of approximately 15 fighters approaching from the west. Mortar team of 3 fighters providing covering fire from the south.
Diversionary force of 4 fighters engaging your northern perimeter.
Williams had been studying the attack pattern and reported something that made Morrison's blood run cold.
Boss, this isn't just about destroying Chapman.
They're trying to capture specific areas of the base.
They want something inside.
Morrison focused his scope on the main Taliban force and realized Williams was right. Instead of trying to inflict maximum casualties or destroy the base's infrastructure, the attackers were focusing their efforts on gaining access to specific buildings within Chapman's perimeter.
Chen, ask Chapman what's in the buildings the Taliban are targeting.
The response came quickly and confirmed Morrison's growing understanding of the true scope of the operation. Bravo team, they're focusing on our intelligence center and communications hub. If they gain access to those facilities, they'll compromise our entire regional intelligence network. Morrison realized they weren't just watching an attack on a single base, they were watching an attempt to capture intelligence that could compromise American operations throughout the region. And someone inside the American command structure was helping to facilitate that capture. The radio crackled with Hassan's voice, weak but still providing critical intelligence.
American forces, the main attack force has demolition specialists.
They plan to breach your intelligence center and extract specific files before destroying the facility. Morrison felt sick as he realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just a military attack, it was an intelligence operation designed to steal American secrets while making it look like a routine Taliban raid. And Hassan, the man they had been ordered to eliminate, was the only person providing intelligence to prevent it.
Santos reported movement that confirmed Hassan's warning.
Boss, I can see fighters with demolition equipment moving toward Chapman's intelligence center.
They're not trying to destroy it, they're trying to get inside it.
Morrison made a decision that would either save Chapman or get his team killed.
All positions were going active. Chapman needs fire support to prevent those buildings from being compromised. It was a massive violation of operational protocol.
Morrison's team was supposed to be conducting surveillance and reconnaissance, not engaging in direct combat. But, if they didn't intervene, Chapman would fall and critical intelligence would be captured by enemy forces.
Santos opened fire first, his precise shots disrupting the demolition team's approach to the intelligence center.
Rodriguez and Thompson followed, engaging the mortar team that had been providing covering fire for the main assault. Morrison coordinated the engagement while maintaining communication with Chapman.
"Chapman, we are providing fire support on enemy positions.
Adjust your defensive fire to avoid our positions." The battle became a three-way engagement, with Chapman's defenders, Morrison's team, and the Taliban forces all maneuvering for advantage in the darkness. But Morrison's team had the critical advantage of observing the entire battlefield from elevated positions. Chen monitored enemy communications and reported that the Taliban forces were becoming confused and disorganized.
"Boss, they're reporting that their intelligence about Chapman's defenses was wrong.
They're taking casualties from positions they didn't expect to be defended." Morrison realized that Hassan's warning had not only alerted Chapman to the attack but had also disrupted the intelligence network that was supposed to ensure its success. By maintaining full defensive measures instead of following the compromised orders, Chapman had turned what should have been a successful raid into a costly failure for the attackers.
Williams reported that the main Taliban force was beginning to withdraw. "Boss, they're pulling back. The attack is failing."
But Morrison knew that the withdrawal of the Taliban forces was only the beginning of their problems. Someone in the American command structure had orchestrated this attack, and, when it failed, they would look for someone to blame. The radio crackled with a transmission that confirmed Morrison's fears. The same unfamiliar voice that had tried to recall his team earlier was now demanding an immediate explanation. "Bravo team, report your status and explain your unauthorized engagement with enemy forces." Morrison realized that whoever had orchestrated the attack was now trying to control the aftermath. By framing Morrison's team as rogue operators who had violated their orders, they could discredit any reports about inside assistance to the Taliban forces.
"Chen, record everything.
All radio traffic, all communications, everything we've observed.
We're going to need proof of what really happened here."
Morrison knew that his team was about to face accusations that could destroy their careers and possibly result in court-martial proceedings. But they also had evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American military operations. Hassan's voice came through the radio one final time, barely audible but carrying information that would either vindicate Morrison's team or get them all killed. "American forces, I have proof of who helped plan this attack. I have documents, recordings, evidence of the betrayal.
But I need protection. They will try to kill me now that their operation has failed."
Morrison realized that Hassan wasn't just an intelligence source, he was a witness to treason.
And whoever had orchestrated the attack on Chapman would now focus all their efforts on eliminating Hassan before he could provide evidence of their involvement.
The battle for Chapman was over, but the real war was just beginning. Morrison's team had evidence of a conspiracy, but they also had powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to prevent that evidence from being exposed. Thompson reported that the Taliban forces had completely withdrawn, leaving behind equipment and casualties that would provide additional evidence of the sophisticated nature of their operation.
"Boss, they left behind some interesting equipment. Military-grade communications gear, detailed maps of Chapman's layout, even copies of what looked like American defensive procedures."
Morrison realized they had stumbled onto something much larger than a single attack on a single base. The evidence suggested a network of infiltration and betrayal that could compromise American operations throughout the region. But they also had Hassan, who had risked everything to expose that network, and who was now the only person who could provide proof of the conspiracy they had uncovered. The question was whether Morrison's team could protect Hassan long enough for him to testify, and whether they could survive the inevitable attempts to discredit and eliminate them for what they had discovered. As the sun began to rise over the Afghan mountains, Morrison realized that the most dangerous part of their mission was just beginning. They had prevented an attack, saved hundreds of lives, and uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of their command structure. But they had also made enemies of people with the power to destroy them, and the only witness to their version of events was an Afghan intelligence asset whose life was now in extreme danger. The battle for Chapman had been won, but the battle for truth was just beginning. The aftermath of the failed attack on FOB Chapman brought a deceptive calm to the Afghan mountains, but Morrison knew that the real battle was just beginning. As his team collected evidence from the battlefield and prepared to extract Hassan, Morrison's radio crackled with transmissions that confirmed his worst fears about what they would face when they returned to base.
Bravo team, you are ordered to return immediately for disciplinary action.
Your unauthorized engagement with enemy forces and violation of mission parameters will be subject to full investigation. Morrison recognized the voice as belonging to Colonel James Mitchell, a staff officer who had never been involved in their operations before. The fact that Mitchell was now taking control of their mission debriefing was another piece of evidence pointing to a conspiracy that reached far beyond a single failed attack. Chen had been documenting everything they had observed, and his report painted a picture of coordination between Taliban forces and someone inside American command that was too extensive to be coincidental. Boss, I've got recordings of enemy communications that reference specific American defensive procedures, copies of Chapman's security protocols found on Taliban casualties, and communications equipment that's way too sophisticated for a routine insurgent operation. Morrison realized they were sitting on evidence that could expose a network of betrayal and treason, but only if they could get that evidence to someone who wasn't part of the conspiracy. The challenge was determining who could be trusted when the corruption apparently reached into the highest levels of their command structure. Hassan had been monitoring their radio traffic from his compound, and his voice came through Morrison's earpiece with urgent concern.
American forces, I must speak with you before you leave.
I have evidence that will prove everything, but I also know that they will try to kill me now that their operation has failed. You must take this evidence back with you. Morrison made a decision that would either vindicate everything his team had done or provide final proof of their insubordination.
Hassan, we're coming to you.
Have your evidence ready and be prepared to move quickly.
Santos looked at Morrison with concern. Boss, if we extract Hassan, we're definitely going rogue.
There's no way command will see this as anything other than kidnapping a foreign national. Morrison understood the implications, but he also understood that Hassan was the only witness who could corroborate their version of events.
Without Hassan's testimony, Morrison's team would be easy scapegoats for the failed conspiracy. We're not kidnapping him.
We're protecting a valuable intelligence asset who has information critical to national security.
If command wants to court-martial us for that, they're welcome to try. Williams had been studying the terrain between their position and the extraction point. Boss, if we're going to move Hassan, we need to do it now.
I'm picking up radio chatter that suggests we're about to have company. Morrison realized that whoever had orchestrated the attack on Chapman was now focusing their efforts on eliminating the witnesses who could expose their involvement. Hassan was the primary target, but Morrison's team was also at risk for what they had observed.
Thompson, Rodriguez, establish a perimeter around Hassan's compound.
Santos, Chen, Williams, we're going in to collect Hassan and his evidence.
Everyone stays alert, we're probably not the only ones interested in Hassan right now.
As Morrison's team approached Hassan's compound, Morrison couldn't help but think about the series of choices that had brought them to this point. 12 hours ago, they had been preparing to eliminate Hassan on orders from their command structure. Now they were risking their careers and, possibly their lives to protect him from that same command structure. Hassan met them at the door of his compound with a canvas bag containing documents, photographs, and recording equipment. His family stood behind him, clearly terrified but trying to remain calm in the face of circumstances they couldn't fully understand. I have everything, Hassan said, his voice steady despite the obvious stress. Recordings of meetings between American officers and Taliban leaders, copies of intelligence reports that were passed to enemy forces, even photographs of money changing hands. But I also know that powerful people want this evidence destroyed, and they want me dead. Morrison looked at Hassan's family and realized that protecting Hassan meant protecting all of them. The conspiracy they had uncovered wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses, including innocent civilians who had done nothing more than provide shelter for someone who risked his life to help American forces. Hassan, we can protect you, but we can't protect your family if you come with us. If you stay here, we can't protect any of you from whoever ordered the attack on Chapman. Hassan looked at his wife and children, then back at Morrison.
If I do nothing, they will kill my family to send a message.
If I provide this evidence, maybe they will have a chance to live in a world where such corruption cannot flourish.
Morrison realized that Hassan understood the stakes better than anyone.
He wasn't just providing evidence to save his own life, he was sacrificing his safety to expose a network of betrayal that threatened the lives of countless American and Afghan civilians. Chen's radio crackled with an intercept that confirmed Morrison's fears about their immediate situation.
Boss, Taliban communications indicate that a joint force is moving toward Hassan's location.
They're not just trying to eliminate Hassan, they're trying to eliminate all the witnesses to what happened at Chapman. Morrison understood that they were now facing a coordinated effort to cover up the conspiracy by eliminating everyone who could provide evidence of its existence. Hassan's compound was about to become a battleground, and Morrison's team was outnumbered and outgunned.
Hassan, we need to move now. Grab your evidence and anything essential for your family. We're extracting all of you.
It was a massive expansion of their mission, but Morrison realized that leaving Hassan's family behind would be tantamount to murder. Whoever was orchestrating the cover-up wouldn't hesitate to kill innocent civilians to prevent exposure of their crimes.
Santos reported movement approaching from multiple directions. Boss, we've got vehicles approaching from the north and south. Mixed Taliban and what looks like American equipment. This isn't a routine patrol, this is a coordinated operation.
Morrison realized they were facing exactly what Hassan had warned them about, a joint operation between Taliban forces and compromised American personnel designed to eliminate all evidence of the conspiracy. Thompson, Rodriguez, cover the northern approach. Santos, Williams, cover the south.
Chen, get Hassan and his family ready to move. We're about to have a very bad day. The attack on Hassan's compound began with precision that confirmed Morrison's understanding of what they were facing.
The attackers knew exactly how to approach the compound, where the defensive positions were, and how Morrison's team would likely respond to a multi-directional assault. But Morrison's team had one advantage that their attackers didn't expect: they were fighting for something more important than their careers or their lives. They were fighting for the principle that American soldiers don't abandon their allies, and that truth matters more than protecting the reputations of corrupt officers.
The battle for Hassan's compound was brief but intense.
Morrison's team had superior training and equipment, but they were vastly outnumbered and fighting to protect civilians rather than just themselves. Chen managed to get Hassan and his family into a defensive position while coordinating their extraction with whatever loyal forces he could reach on the radio. Boss, I've got contact with someone at Chapman who's willing to provide extraction support. They're sending helicopters, but we need to hold for 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity when facing overwhelming odds, but Morrison's team had held against worse odds and worse circumstances. The difference was that this time, they were fighting against some of their own people as well as traditional enemies.
Santos reported that the northern attack force included American personnel working alongside Taliban fighters. Boss, I can see American uniforms mixed in with the Taliban forces. This is definitely a joint operation.
Morrison felt a cold fury that had nothing to do with the tactical situation. American soldiers were shooting at American soldiers to protect a conspiracy that had already cost hundreds of lives.
The betrayal was complete and absolute.
But, as Morrison coordinated his team's defense of Hassan's compound, he realized that they had already won the most important victory. Hassan's evidence was secure, his family was safe, and the truth about the conspiracy would eventually be exposed. The helicopters arrived exactly when Chen had promised, and Morrison's team executed a fighting withdrawal that extracted Hassan, his family, and all the evidence of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed FOB Chapman. As they flew toward safety, Morrison looked at Hassan and realized that the man they had been ordered to kill had saved not only hundreds of American lives, but also the integrity of American military operations in the region.
Hassan looked back at Morrison and smiled. Thank you for choosing truth over orders.
It is not always an easy choice, but it is always the right choice. Morrison nodded, knowing that the hardest part of their ordeal was still ahead. They would face court-martial proceedings, investigations, and attempts to discredit their testimony. But they had evidence, they had witnesses, and, most importantly, they had clear consciences. 6 months later, Morrison's team would be vindicated when Hassan's evidence exposed a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of American military operations in Afghanistan. Colonel Mitchell and 3 other officers would be convicted of treason, and reforms would be implemented to prevent similar conspiracies from threatening American lives. Hassan and his family would be relocated to safety in the United States, where Hassan would continue to provide valuable intelligence services while building a new life for his children. Morrison's team would receive commendations for their courage in choosing conscience over command, and their story would become a case study in military ethics and the importance of moral courage in the face of illegal orders. But, more importantly, their choice to protect Hassan would save countless lives by exposing a network of betrayal that had been operating for months, facilitating attacks on American forces throughout the region. As Morrison filed his final report on the operation, he realized that the most important lesson wasn't about military tactics or intelligence operations. It was about the courage to do what's right, even when doing what's right means disobeying orders, risking careers, and standing alone against powerful enemies. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty to your country is the willingness to disobey the people who claim to represent it. Sometimes protecting American values means protecting the people who embody those values, regardless of their nationality or background. And, sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you from across a battlefield. Sometimes it's the one giving you orders from behind a desk, counting on your obedience to facilitate their betrayal of everything you've sworn to protect. Morrison's team had learned that lesson in the mountains of Afghanistan, and they had chosen truth over lies, conscience over command, and courage over convenience. They had saved hundreds of lives by making that choice, but, more importantly, they had preserved their own integrity and the principles that made their service meaningful. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.